Come on in. Welcome to New York.
Good to see you, dude.
Welcome.
So, I tried shooting this intro live several times, but each time I miserably failed, so let me start again. This is an interview show called Coffee With, where I have interesting conversations over coffee with YouTubers or anyone that's interesting. This is the first episode where I interview the amazing Will Schoder, but before we get to who he is and start the show, I want to tell you why I created Coffee With now that I finished the interview and have had time to collect my thoughts. If you don't know me, I run Coffee Break, a video essay channel where I break down big ideas, but besides being a creator myself, I'm also a really big fan of other YouTubers that break down big ideas. I love when someone can teach complex ideas and are on the cutting edge of using media to do so. And I want to talk with some of these people, discuss their ideas, inspirations, and origins. Usually these people are behind a curtain of professionalism in their videos, but if you strip that away and just talk with them, you find that they're unexpectedly witty or funny or kind, and I want to show that over a cup of coffee. Plus, it's a great excuse to go meet and talk to these amazing educators, entertainers, thinkers, drinkers, and maybe one day Steven Pinkers. The last one's kind of down the road. But yeah, that's the thesis of the show. So now that you're caught up to speed, let me just say, this will be available as a podcast, as a video interview on YouTube, and highlights should also be going up soon. And especially on these first few episodes, I'm very interested in feedback. So after watching the show, leave your comments of what you thought and maybe some questions you'd like to hear in the future. For our first guest, we have Will Schoder. He makes videos on culture, irony, postmodernism, philosophy, the brain, and even Mr. Rogers. In this interview, we talk about what it means to be a video essayist, we talk philosophy, the age of distraction we live in, Will's gratitude notes he writes every morning, and more. It's a little slow going at first, but I think we hit our stride toward the middle, and some really cool stuff comes out of the conversation. For those of you who are watching this, I did mess up the camera angle on Will's face, so he's a little bit out of frame for the first half until I realized my mistake and we kind of fixed it, so my apologies for that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Grab a cup of coffee, grab a cozy couch. Here's me flying to New York City, and here's what we talked about. Ready?
Sure.
Let's do it. All right.
Let's start.
Welcome to the first edition of Coffee With, where we interview interesting creators. Interesting creators. Oh man, I hate doing stuff live. Which is why I created this show.
Gotta conquer those fears.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on. Today we're drinking out of the Schoder mugs. Get yourself one on his Patreon, and let's get into it. So this is a question that I always wanted to ask a fellow video essayist. How do you describe what you do?
That's a tough question.
Like if someone said, what's your genre? They don't know anything about video essays. What do you say?
I'm definitely still working on this one. Yeah, me too. I think it's really hard to describe exactly what video essays are.
Sure.
There have been many fights on the internet, I think, about defining what a video essay is. Mm-hmm. I personally define it very widely. But when let's say I'm at dinner with people that I don't know, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And then they ask, what are video essays? I think the way I describe it is simply, I write an essay, and I try and animate that essay.
Yeah, okay.
And that is literally it. I don't try and add any bells and whistles to it, because that's really the process that I do. I write an essay, and then I spend an exorbitant amount of time figuring out how to animate that essay.
Right.
That's literally it.
I've tried stories about ideas. I've tried mini documentaries before, but I have yet to come up with a really good.
Yeah. Video essays tend to follow a format that can mold in any way that you want. Mm-hmm. It has to have a, thesis, and it has to have a conclusion.
Pretty much anything.
But in between there, in a lot of my videos, I start with sort of in my most recent video, I talk about how I have this problem all the time about, I can't retain information that I want to retain. And that's just sort of starting with hey, this is an opinion piece. I have this problem. And then from there, I could jump into how to fix that. I think you could also not do that and just start with how to fix that. You know, you can kind of do it any way you really want.
That's a lot how I look at it too. So with how broadly you can think about video essays, what do you think about the tendency to focus on film? I think if you look at most video essays, they tend to focus specifically on film analysis, which is, it makes sense in the medium because before analyzing film was very difficult.
Right.
And now you can just show it on screen and like point out all the different things.
Totally.
But is that a limiting way to think about it?
Yes, but it also makes sense. So it's almost like essays were really great to analyze certain things in the past, textually, and movies and film never had that, and now they have that,
right? Which
is huge, because if you want to explain how a visual medium works, you should probably use a visual medium.
Yeah.
But I do think it is limiting, because I think video essays encompass quite literally anything that you want to talk about. Any explanatory thing, any opinion thing. I mean, anything that you can write an essay about should be able to become a video. I think Tony Zhu, when he started Every Frame of Painting, sort of caused...
Is that how you say his name? Zhu?
I'm not sure.
I thought it was, I don't know.
Joe, maybe?
The King.
The king, yeah. You know,
the legend.
The guy who kind of started it all.
Yeah.
He obviously started with film, and then that cascaded, and, you know, everybody else started to do that as well.
Right.
And I think that's great. I think there's an infinite number of perspectives that people can come at film and TV with. I do think there remains a void in audiovisual content that is not about film and TV. And that's still just kind of starting up, I think. Vox does it. They're sort of the most, at least in my mind, them and The Nerdwriter were the first ones to sort of like push video essay content that wasn't strictly film and television. Yeah. I would even argue that like animated explainers fall into a video essay category. Like, In a Nutshell is definitely, in my mind, video essay. Right. It's just, it gets put in the animated explainer category because that's kind of what it is, but it can fit in the
absolutely
this is a video essay category. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. I'm becoming totally aware of how much I say the same words to respond. Like I'm like, right.
Oh.
Right.
Yes. I mean, I think when you listen to a lot of podcasts, you also become hyper aware of the people who do it.
Yeah.
You're like, this person is someone who has to say, yes, right after like the thing. And then other people will just, until the person ends their thing, and then they come back in.
Let me cut in. Yeah, no, actually I think for audio it's probably better to just wait. I don't know. Let me check.
It's all about learning to see what works, you know? Yeah. Unless you do it a bunch, you have no idea.
So something that I find really interesting about whenever I looked at your channel for the first time, you are not tied to an upload schedule, nearly at all.
As much as I wish I was.
Yeah, I think of my own like uploads as rather sporadic, but I get very anxious when I haven't uploaded in a while, and I was just wondering, how do you think about upload schedule and all that kind of stuff? Because you seem to be somebody who you're so much more concerned with the product being done than you. I think even in your description, you're like, videos come out when they're done.
Yeah, videos come out when they're done.
Which is a little bit of a middle finger to the others. Like, you guys can wait.
Yeah, well, videos come out when they're done because I think there is a lot to be said about pressuring yourself to meet a deadline. In my experience, even when I put a deadline on a video essay, I, without a doubt, fly right past that deadline because it's not done.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more important that the product is high quality and teaches well and, is free of flaws. I have a perfectionist problem. Obviously, it takes me like 3 months to release some videos. So I think I have yet to find the happy medium, which is, getting it as good as you can, but also releasing more content. I'm in between. I'm trying to get in between right now. I'm all the way at it has to be totally, totally done.
Right.
To the perfect image that I have. I'll get over it eventually.
And to be clear with the audience, because sometimes I think if you don't appear for 3 months, they can think that either you're you're working or you're doing whatever. To be clear, what's your work schedule like when you do that? Because there's sporadic uploads, so sometimes people can think, oh, he's working, it's the same amount of hours to complete each video, but he just was busy during this time or not busy.
Yes.
How much are you working?
The hours that I put into videos varies. So, for example, I have a video about satire, cartoons and satire, right? That video probably took me 60 hours in total.
Right.
But then another video, for example, the I Am a Strange Loop video, took me 3 months of working pretty much every day for a full day.
Yeah.
Like a full day of work. So it depends on the topic of the video is the first part. If I were to talk about Star Wars, I could just take Star Wars, use the pre-existing footage from Star Wars and talk over it. Some topics, if you're making original animation, can take much longer because you have to make every second new. So the time varies, but for me, I have, certain obligations that I do throughout the week. But for the most part, I am in here editing video.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What is so when you have an idea, let's start with idea capture. Let's try to go through the creative process a little bit.
Sure.
What's your idea capture? Do you have a note on your iPhone? What do you do?
I do have an idea capture, which is an Excel document. I just basically fill it with ideas, and then I'll color code it in terms of priority. So it'll be green is this needs to happen sooner, yellow is after green, and then red is I'm kind of interested in that, but it's kind of on the back burner. That's how I organize my ideas. In terms of idea capture and how that then becomes a video is very much I've been thinking about this constantly for the last, couple months, and now I want to release that thought.
Yeah.
All those thoughts into something hopefully helpful to people. And that can come from reading a couple different books and seeing how different ideas connect, or reading articles, or just seeing the flow of ideas on the internet and deciding if it's something that I should produce. But for the most part, it's I've been thinking about this constantly, and I think it's worthwhile to put it into words.
Right. Yeah. So have you had ideas not pan out? I've had many a time where I start the research process and either one of my intuitions was wrong, or something that I thought maybe was supported in the data was not supported in the data. Something that was kind of part of what made it interesting kind of fell through, or wasn't as interesting as I thought. Has that ever happened to you?
It's never happened just because before I even start it, I know all the surrounding ideas before I start writing it. I'm I have the outline here, and I know that this is how I want it to flow. I think more likely, and this has happened, is I'll have an idea, and then I realize the scope is just gonna make me go crazy, and I can't do it.
Well, what? You got one you can think of?
I wanted to do something about the internet and how there's this theory, it's called the social intuitionist theory, and how it binds us into tribes on the internet, and just how that theory interacts strangely with like how we use the internet. So one of my I think what's most interesting to me at the current moment is we are these like ancient organisms from, over 100,000 years ago. We have very like strange things going on that were useful a long time ago. Now we have this crazy technology and our brains interface in like really unfortunate ways. Like a great example is just envy. Envy was very useful in small populations, but when you're connected to the world, suddenly it malfunctions. So I was trying to like get this idea of social intuitionist theory about tribalism and the internet, and just the scope started growing and growing and growing to the point where I couldn't handle it. Like I felt that I couldn't make it into a video without missing a huge. It would have to become a documentary.
Right.
It would have to become a documentary about the internet. It just couldn't be a video essay. You know what I mean? Yeah. That was one time I just was like, cut it off. We're done.
Yeah.
You need to move on. Talk about a movie. Yeah.
Kind of the follow-up question I had on that was, but to start, that idea is from The Righteous Mind, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because I like skimmed it last night.
Oh, did you?
Just
Nice.
a little bit of it.
Yeah.
But he started talking about, social intuitionist theory and how he thought that was really...
I mean, it's fascinating to me. When I read that book, it sort of connected with a bunch of other things that I had been thinking for a long time. And I was like, this makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I feel like he as an author, the author's name is Jonathan Haidt, did his best to be detached. He didn't try and, bring a bunch of bias into his research. He says that like he was for his life he felt a certain way, and by just doing this scientific research, he sort of moved his positions instead of trying to move the research to his positions.
Right.
Which I felt like is a great way to establish that this person is writing something for you, not for them. Yeah, I love that book.
Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
Isn't there a subtitle like Why Politics and Religion Divide Good People?
Why good people
There we go.
disagree about politics and religion.
Yeah. And that's brought up in your video about...
Persuasion.
Yeah,
and that's not even the half of it in my video. That's a very basic, like, overview of it. Because the book starts with talking about the elephant and the rider. Mm-hmm. And the elephant and the rider is about your emotional, impulsive reaction to things. And the rider is your rationality, assessment of a situation kind of thing. And he just talks about how the elephant, the emotion, is much stronger. 99% of 100%.
Then we think. We assume we're just in charge.
We assume we're, rational, controlling everything. But he says, that's not true. A lot of it is you actually coming in with all of your bias and he describes it as moral taste buds of things, and your reaction to that will immediately color how you see facts and opinions and all information. So the reason in persuasion why it's so important to establish common ground is if you're just shouting at, a no-face on the internet, there's no connection with the 99%.
The elephant.
The elephant at all, right? And so everybody's yelling at each other, trying to be rational, but they never establish any commonality between each other. It's just these strangers who think they're, holier than thou or smarter than the other person. But it's just basically words that are not connecting with either side.
And usually the assumption is if I can just put together the perfect argument, I can be as rude or distasteful as I want, and they will just come over to my side because of my,
Your incredible intelligence.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a small subset of the population who is looking for that, who is like, oh, I only like really insightful, INCITE, insight, people who incite like, anger and things like that with truth. But in terms of the general population, convincing people is got to get on the same side first, whether that even be something like we share the same taste in TV shows.
And this would imply that either we need to change the way that we talk about like things like politics or like religion in his book, or that we've just decided that we don't care about convincing each other and we're just kind of shouting within our tribe.
Exactly. And that's also a big part of the book too, which is sort of like, because of social intuitionist theory, which argues that our ability to reason has nothing to do with finding truth, it has to do with bringing people into our group. It's the same idea. It's, I'm only saying this because I want to tighten my own tribe.
Right.
It has very little to do with finding the truth between tribes.
Right.
So that's the social intuitionist theory, and that's why when you read it, it's kind of, it's sad. Because you're like, wow, it's really hard to argue across these tribal divides.
Yeah.
Because their intuitions are different. Like, so much so that they don't know they're different.
I think one of the most interesting parts that I got to in that book was he starts talking about these post hoc reasons for like justifying your biases and believing that those reasons are built on some level of like absolute truth. And it makes sense of why on both sides of the fence there are things that we'll defend about our group that are kind of morally reprehensible. Like all these evangelical conservatives who are like, oh yeah, Trump saying, grab her by whatever.
Right.
That's totally like there's reasons, and they'll make all the excuses, or they'll be like, well, Bill Clinton did it, and vice versa. And so it seems to me like what seems to be like a hypocritical stance actually is just this playing out exactly how you'd expect it to.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just plays out. When you see all controversy on the internet, if you put it through that framework, you understand why there's so much hypocrisy in politics and religion. Because the writer's there to justify behavior, regardless of whether it fits into like a set of principles. It's simply there to justify what has been done. Mm-hmm. And people are really good at it.
And it's interesting to me, something I realize is actually the smarter you are, the better you are at fooling yourself. And the more sophisticated your arguments can get, and the more you can obfuscate the fact that you are actually serving this, purpose. I think
100%.
There's this thing like people don't have ideas, ideas have people. Anyway, that's what I think of. Or ideologies or moral taste buds have people.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Like this, I think the smarter people tend to be able to justify pretty much anything they want, because they're able to create these really highfalutin arguments, like whenever they need to.
Right.
It's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it to everybody.
Would you say that that's actually, because that was going to be one of my questions, like what's one of your favorite books that you recommend all the time?
In terms of nonfiction, I highly recommend The Righteous Mind. I recommend Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. I think that is another really great framework for people to think about. And then in terms of fiction, I love A Confederacy of Dunces. It is my favorite work of fiction.
My wife read that on our honeymoon, and she loved it.
It is the funniest book I've ever read in my life.
So you want to know something interesting about this? You may know this, but I'll just tell the story. That guy, he couldn't get a publisher when he wrote it. And I think he shopped it around for a while. And the sad thing is he ended up committing suicide.
Yep.
I don't know if it was because of that. I think there probably played a role.
Probably played a role, yeah.
And afterwards, it kind of got unearthed. People discovered it, and
His mom found it.
his mom found it.
His mom found it, I think, under his bed. What? And was like, I think reading through it and was like, I think this is really good. So she brought it to, I can't remember if it was a big publisher or a local one.
Yeah.
But she was pretty much like, this is a manuscript. It's not fully there yet, but it's pretty well hashed out. And I think it's really publishable. And great intuition. She was right.
Yep.
And it's just another sad story of a brilliant artist who, after they died, their work becomes...
They get recognized
yeah.
all of a sudden, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to read that book.
It's very funny. In fact, there's a bar down the street.
That's what she said. She goes, it's hilarious.
Oh, it's so funny. There's a bar down the street from here called Night of Joy. And that's the bar in Confederacy.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
You're a champion, Will. All right.
This has been great. I've been having a great time.
Yeah, me too, actually. Actually, that's a whole
Actually, yeah. I wasn't expecting to have a great time, but I'm having a great time.
Yeah, shockingly.
Shockingly, we're having a great time.
So, credit to Will. I basically pitched this idea to him, and you immediately said yes. And then you offered your place up to crash. So I appreciate it, man.
Of course. I mean, when a fellow creator has an idea and they want to make it happen, I think the worst thing that someone could do is say, I'm not interested. You want to help the other person succeed, obviously without tying down all of your other stuff that you need to work on. But if you reach out and want something to happen, I think you have to help make it happen.
To all of you who I'm going to reach out to after this, you heard it here first. Will Schoder said, by the way, his name is Will Schoder.
Thank you.
Get it right.
Yeah.
Please.
I'm pretty sure in my life, 95% of everybody says Schoder, which is intuitive. That's why they do it. That's what it looks like. That's what people are used to. But it is Schoder.
I said it right the first time. That's not true. All right, let's see here. Do you have any hobbies that no one knows about?
Oh, that's interesting.
That you've been doing before video essays? What you did before video essays?
Yeah. I have a huge hobby for comedy. I love comedy. At one point in my life, I wanted to have that be my job. I wanted to write or perform it. And pretty much since high school, that was in my mind. I was like, oh, I would love to do this. And I was obsessed with stand-up and improv and, half-hour sitcom comedies, things like that.
Who were your guys growing up?
I went through a lot of phases.
Or girls?
And girls. I went through a lot of phases. I started with, his name is no longer as pretty now, but Bill Cosby was the first comedian that I came in contact with where I was like, this is awesome. This is so cool. My dad had tapes of Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
And his style of delivery and the fact that he could sit in a chair and do all these funny voices and move his body in interesting ways. And the way he told stories, I think, is what he's really well known for, is just how perfect he can play a bunch of different characters within a small narrative.
Right.
Especially his family. So Bill Cosby was
first. I remember
first.
the dentist bit that always killed
so
me.
funny. So funny. He's got so many great bits about, one of my favorites is he's in the football locker room, right? And they're down at half, and the coach gets them riled up and people are ripping stuff up, in the locker room. They're going crazy. And then they all run out. They're pumped up and the door to the locker room's locked. So everybody just immediately, the energy goes like, because they're stuck. So Bill Cosby was what started it for me. Mm-hmm. And then I would say the SNL, early on, I would listen to Celebrity Jeopardy, and I would download the skits onto my computer, and I would listen to them. I'd never watched them, but I would listen to them. Yeah. And I thought they were very funny. And then by high school, I got more into, like, of course, I was like an apathetic teenager. So
who wasn't?
I got into, Bill Hicks and George Carlin, the types who would sort of, shake their fist at the world.
Right.
Sam Kinison, those types. And I love those guys. I still do. But then I also developed more taste for people like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler in the more improv side of things, where I thought the highest level of comedy was wit, when people could shoot back and forth without a script,
Yeah, that's amazing.
And be funny for a whole half hour. And, the stand-ups are pretty scripted. The improvisers are just pulling things out of thin air. And so both impress me like to no end. I think comedy is so hard to be really good at. So at this point, I think my taste buds for comedy have sort of gone to almost everybody who is a successful comedian.
Right.
I don't have, I'm not too harsh now. I think when I was younger, I was like, no, only the guys who are really are the good ones.
I've gotten into Norm Macdonald recently.
He's like one of the best living
fabulous.
Comedians. He's definitely one of the best living comedians.
He's a really smart comedian. To get back to your Bill Cosby comment, okay?
Yes, yeah, sure.
I've heard this before. Can you separate, and this is kind of a matter of an opinion,
art from the artist?
Can you separate it? Can you separate art from the artist?
I don't think so. I think what's interesting is, and this is again sort of the emotional, rational thing. Like, rationally, you should be able to separate the art from the artist. Right. But knowing that, can you still go back and watch House of Cards and not think about Kevin Spacey's thing? Like,
probably
can
not.
You separate it?
Yeah, probably not.
I don't think so. So even if you can rationally say, I can separate the art from the artist, I don't think your brain is capable of doing it once you know something. At least it's really hard.
Yeah.
But I think if we were to treat it purely logically, I think you can. But yeah, no way when you are emotionally affected by something.
Right. What are some small routines throughout your day that you find to be really helpful, or you think people would benefit from doing them? Like some people would say, like meditation, maybe.
Yeah, you're ready to get hit with like a bunch of cliches.
Let me give them to me.
Yeah. So at least what I try to do first thing in the morning is write 3 notes of gratitude. So like things that I'm thankful for. That's first thing in the morning.
Where did you learn that?
I have no idea. I'm sure it came from a podcast or a video or something. I have no idea the origin, but it came from the internet is my guess. And so that's probably the most ingrained routine I have. Then after that, I would say exercise is like, if I don't go for a run or I don't do something similar, like my day is not as good as it could have been. That's a big one. Mm-hmm. And again, meditation is awesome. I'm not like as disciplined as some people are who are like going through a program and, getting increasingly making it harder for themselves as they go. I just listen to one recording every day. Mm-hmm. It's a guided meditation,
right.
And I really like it. Those routines are big. And then there's another one, I guess, actually, before the gratitude notes is make your bed. Big one. That comes from, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now, but he is an old Navy commander. And my friend had his book on his shelf, and I said, "Can I borrow that?" And then I read, it's like it's basically 10 rules that you should have that he learned from the Navy SEALs.
Right.
First one being make your bed, because there's so much uncertainty in life that you need to start every day with a small victory. No matter, even if it's just making your bed. There needs to be some stability before the uncertainty of life kicks in. And I think just whether you think it or not, it's helping your brain in some way get going with the day. And then there are other days where like I take a shower and I'm like, that was the biggest win today. That's as far as I'm going to get.
I've had those days, for sure.
But I think those routines are really big for me. I'm trying to think. Oh, and then the last one is like, everybody should pick up a book and try to read for at least an hour, and if you can, 2 hours. That's what I try to go for every day. It's not always going to happen, but I have found that putting aside an hour to 2 hours a day for reading instead of an hour to 2 hours of flashing screens in front of your face is far more beneficial to your life than anything else. It doesn't have to be, a productive book that's teaching you about how to live better or some new theory. It could be detective fiction that gets you going. But as long as you're reading for an hour at least a day, I think is really big.
Do you think that there is, because I think maybe one day you could argue there will be, but do you think there really is any replacement for books? Because obviously you and I are engaged in kind of like a condensing information, and people are very into, let's get down what you need to tell me into as little words as you possibly can.
Right.
I don't want to waste my time. It's like the age of very short attention spans, all this kind of stuff. And for good reason.
Yeah. Everybody feels like they're very short on time.
Yeah.
Which is true. I mean, time is the most valuable resource. But
not true.
Oh, for sure.
Money.
Yeah, okay. I don't accept that at all.
Well, actually, people quite literally trade their time for money every single day. They trade 8 hours of their time.
For sure. But
there's a dollar amount at which you will say, this is worth my time.
Yes, that is true. But just as a thought experiment, time, you have 6 months to live. Do you care about money at all?
Okay. Here's why I don't love this premise.
Why not?
Because this is, at either extreme, it's kind of useless. Like, if you have no material possession or no ability to like get anything, even if you live a lot longer, it's kind of like whatever. But at the same time, if you're like super rich and you have no time, that's bad. There has to be there's obviously
a happy
medium.
Course,
yeah.
Of getting some external wealth to help you with
life,
having more time and easier life. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that when it comes down to brass tacks, you could have zero money and you would want that time, those 6 months, and you could probably do okay just having that time.
You're right. I just wanted to play devil's
advocate. I love devil's advocate. I love it.
Now I'm coming off like the materialistic guy.
No,
money.
Not at all. Like you just said, happy medium. So like even you don't say like, the only thing that matters is my bank account, Like that's ridiculous.
Well, it is pretty high up. No, I'm just kidding.
It's not at
obviously
the
bottom. It's no.
It's like pretty high up there, sure.
Actually, by my own decision making, I don't think it is very high, because
you wouldn't be on YouTube. You wouldn't be on YouTube if your bank account was your primary goal.
Well, especially on video essays, it's like, it is kind of a good time to be in video essays. There is an audience for it, but as far as monetizing it with the upload release schedule of like most video essayists. It's not the most lucrative of.
No, it's not. The video essay model is the in a nutshell model. I can't pronounce their channel.
Don't even try.
The in a nutshell model, which is like you get enough of a loyal audience that they want your content no matter how long it takes you to make it. And then that in itself is sustainable, and that hopefully your content is so desirable and informational that, like, I think they've even been sponsored by the Gates Foundation. So
that's true.
So like it's just a different goal, right?
Right.
The Logan Paul of the world, the way he makes money is, constantly uploading videos.
Right.
It's just a different business model.
Yeah. But the thing is he can bring in almost as many viewers on one video that In a Nutshell will bring in on one video, and he produces 30 times. Mm-hmm. But what I have kind of enjoyed watching is things like Patreon, things where people can support you outside of just ad revenue, have really changed what is possible to create, the quality you can put into a video.
100%.
Because I was looking at YouTube. Remember when like animations were really big on YouTube, and they would get a bunch of
YouTube killed animation, like I forget when, but it was not that long ago.
Yeah, they pretty much. The problem was you just weren't going to be making the kind of money needed to put in the hours because it's just a very time-intensive thing.
Right.
And I think the equation has been changed a little bit by things like Patreon but it's significant. It helps the creator.
Oh, it's changed it a lot, and it's only going to get better. I think I talked in a brief Twitter exchange with Jack Conte, who's the founder of Patreon, and he's like super, super optimistic about the direction of creators on the internet and having the ad model sort of not. I don't think it'll ever be phased out, but it's not going to hold as much weight for creators in the future, which I think is going to be great. How that's going to happen, I don't know. It was just a short Twitter exchange. But I think just knowing that he has a vision that is super positive and he's just working hard on it every day, I think he sees really good things happening in the future for people who are on Patreon and creators on the internet.
Yeah, in general, I can very easily. I'm surprised it hasn't rolled out yet. So, like people who are really good at monetizing their creators is like Twitch. I think is in some ways
Twitch
the gold
really
standard of like if you have 17,000 concurrent viewers on Twitch, that's like more than probably 500,000 subscribers as far as your ability to sustain yourself. So I think one thing that I'm surprised YouTube hasn't rolled out, and I think they will in the future, is some kind of sponsorship through YouTube.
Have you seen the buttons?
No, they have the button, but have you heard of Twitch Prime?
Yeah.
Okay, so Twitch Prime is tied to Amazon, and you get a free Twitch Prime. And that has really increased the ability for Twitch to make its creators money. I think YouTube will do the same thing with YouTube Red, where if you have a YouTube Red account, you can do a monthly subscription to a creator, and
that helps them and costs you nothing, kind of thing.
I would be shocked if they don't do that because their Red subscriptions would go way up, which I don't think they're doing that well with Red.
I am not positive about why I don't think Red has been doing as well as they hoped.
Right.
I think that they had these creators that were popular on the platform and they wanted to develop shows with them, like kind of TV shows. And what turned out happening was like the people who subscribed to those, personalities were there for the personalities. They weren't there to watch them go on a TV show. And so the audience didn't want to see the Red show. They wanted to see the personality making the content that they've always been making.
So something I've thought about recently is whether or not it's too far of a brand extension for YouTube to try to become like TV, which they have clearly been trying to do. They tried with Red, and they've even done this YouTube TV, right? I read this book about branding where they talk about how a lot of brands assume that their audience will follow them wherever they go. So for example,
True.
Coors did it was Coors or Miller, and I'll say it right here. They did a bottled water. And it was like Coors spring water or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like done in 2 years of like trying to launch this thing because people associate it with this thing, and the association is actually almost what kills them in the end, because it's like, we just don't see you as that. Right. And I think for most people who think of YouTube, right, they're thinking of the you in YouTube, and you don't think of like I Love Lucy or like, you know, House of Cards or anything like that. You think of just a guy with a camera, or two guys with two cameras.
Right. The perspective changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, two guys with two cameras in a hot room, might I add. The funny thing, I think, well, okay, so similar example is like Nike. I forget who said this, but he said Nike could get into the potato chip business. They have a marketing team, they have the money, right. They could make potato chips. Do you think that would succeed long term for Nike? Probably not. They're known to sell sneakers, and they're an athletic wear company. So even though you're changing from one form of visual medium to another form of the visual medium, I think that gap is large enough that the perspective difference for an audience member is too large.
Yeah.
To be like, oh, I don't see this person as an actor. I see them as one of my friends. You know what I mean?
One of the weird things is there are few companies who've done it. So like the rare exception is like Virgin. So they have
a lot of
Virgin
stuff
has like Virgin Mobile, they have like Virgin Airlines, and they have Virgin Records. Like they started as a record company.
Right.
Or a label, I'm not sure which. But anyway, they've been able to just basically, but they've kind of made that their brand, is they kind of go into all these different spaces and they bring the Virgin model or the Virgin, you know, attitude.
Right.
But that seems to be kind of the exception rather than the norm. And for YouTube, I think they're not the exception. It seems right now.
They're having trouble with it.
Yeah.
If you're a big tech company, you can branch out into a lot of different types of tech, I think. But I think it's much harder for a company that is known for a very specific product to branch out into anything else.
Yeah.
But, you know, I could be wrong. My knowledge of marketing and how businesses have grown in interesting ways is below par, for sure. It interests me, but my like knowledge of the history of certain corporations and how they succeeded, no idea.
All right, so most people don't know. Most people don't know, and even I didn't know until, and I follow you pretty closely, until I really started to dive in.
Yeah.
You didn't start on YouTube exactly. You started with this thing called ACS.
Mm-hmm. It's the Al Capone show.
The Al Capone show. And it's actually where his logo comes from.
Correct. Yeah, so I'll give you some background on the logo first. Yeah. So, called the Al Capone show. Growing up, one of my nicknames was Schoder Pony. People called me Schoder Pony.
That's great.
Yeah. And
why?
That is another great question. I don't know.
Okay.
There was a mentor of mine who threw it at me one time. Hey, Schoder Pony, you know, can you help me with this? Or, you know, and then it just stuck forever. And it flowed really well. So he said it once.
That's going to be a meme from now, a Schoder Pony.
Yeah, so nice. It was a name that, you know, I didn't dislike. I thought it was kind of funny and fun. And it flowed nicely right off the tongue.
Yeah.
So it just stuck with me forever. And then I was like, oh, now I'm trying to start a brand online, or at least a logo for a show. Why don't I just keep the pony thing and have someone draw me a logo that works for that? And I reached out to somebody who made that logo, and I thought, first try, it was great. And here we are. Now, in terms of the actual show itself.
An Al Capone side of the Al Capone show.
Yeah, so...
That's the mystery to me.
And it should remain a mystery, because I'm not sure I even know why I called it that.
This is amazing.
So I I think one thing that a lot of people have trouble doing when they're creating a channel or a show is like, what are we going to call it? What should the name of this be?
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And it's even more painful to spend weeks thinking about it and then come up and settle on a weird name, and I thought it was such a silly, like looking back, it's a totally silly name to have chosen. But I'm sure there was a reason, when I started it 6 years ago. This is a podcast, by the way. Al Capone Show is a podcast.
Yeah, to clarify.
And I started it.
It's a comedy podcast.
It's
specifically
a sketch comedy podcast.
Yeah.
And I started it right out of college.
First time, people. This is our first time.
Because I'm a huge believer in just for creating necessity for you to make things. So I was really interested in comedy and getting into comedy. And so I said, I need to start something that's going to force me to create content and get better at this.
Right.
And so I said, okay, sketch comedy podcast. It's going to force me to write. It's going to force me to do voices. And that's exactly what it was. And, I would, looking back now, I'm sure a lot of it's very cringeworthy. I feel like I worked pretty hard on some of them, and I'm sure some of them stand the test of time. But really, it's just a great example of somebody making something before they became known by a wider group of people, and that project never really being that significant, but being a part of them as a creative.
Yeah, what do you think that taught you about the creative process? Because video essays and sketch comedy, there doesn't seem to be too much of an
connection
overlay,
at all. Well, that was more my interest in comedy, and I was trying to practice writing humor. The reason I don't want to get into the reason I switched quite yet, but the reason I created that, again, is because I am a firm believer in the, just practice until you're perfect.
For sure.
Kind of thing.
For sure. And specifically releasing content, I think, is important, and not obsessing over
this minutia of, this little piece of audio has a little blip in it, and I can't release this until this is silenced.
I'm sure you've gotten this too, is hey, I'm starting a video essay channel. Tell me what you think. How should I start? And what I always say, and this is really what I believe, is not only just start, but try to finish something as quickly as possible that you like, and it's the best you probably could have done in maybe 3 to 5 days or something like that. And just iterate upon it, because no matter how much time you spend on it, you're going to look back in even a month and you're going to just cringe at it. Yeah. And that's okay, because that's part of it. Is that what you say as well?
Whenever I get an email asking for advice about starting a channel, especially a video essayist channel, is simply, you just have to start doing it. Because as soon as you go through the process, that's how you learn the process. I think I've told you this story, which is the teacher and the ceramic pots.
Tell it again. I love that. I love this. Yeah, so great.
So it's the beginning of the semester, and the teacher divides the class in two. On the left side, she says, this half of the class, you're going to be graded based on the weight of your pots. So at the end of the semester, those with 40 pounds get an A, 30 pounds B, etc. This other half of the class is going to be judged on one perfect pot. And, that is all you get. You get one pot. So the semester goes on. Half the class is making as many as they can. The other is theorizing. How am I going to make this one pot perfect? At the end of the semester, the guys who made all the quantity had the best pots. Because these people started and only made one, they didn't have enough trial and error to make a perfect pot. So the guys who made the weight also made the quality ones.
Right.
So I think that's just a great analogy of, you just have to keep doing it, and as you trial and error, you start to realize ooh, this part of the process is not streamlined, it's not good. Oh, this is how you make this more visually appealing. Oh, this is a better way to edit my audio. You just have to keep, trial and erroring things, and eventually you're going to get there. That's literally all it is.
And it's all it is, but it's not intuitive when you haven't done it before.
Right.
And that's what I think people get hung up on is they do think that like, I can perfectly craft if I just think hard enough about it, if I just do it enough.
Right.
And yeah, so that's, I think, a really important lesson.
I think the best advice that I can give someone who's starting a video essay channel is watch your favorite video essayists and then ask yourself, how did they do that? So I really liked those 3 seconds. How do I make that in, my editing program? Because once you start asking those questions, then you're going to have to teach yourself how to make it, and then you're going to be able to make the exact same product. So you say, oh, they have a moving background. I'm going to research how they have a moving paper background.
Right.
Oh, they have, something wiggling in the air like this. How do I do that? How do I make it so the edges are vignetted? Like all those kinds of things, you just have to ask yourself while you're watching.
Yeah.
And then as you write them down, how do they do that? You're going to figure it out.
And I think it's important to note, because I think some video essayists have backgrounds in film, but I at least know, because we talked a little bit, I think you majored in what again?
History.
I majored in chemical engineering. Neither of us have any background in
video
editing,
no.
anything like that. So
no. I made short films with my friends in high school. But that's very different from video essays.
Absolutely. It's very different from like proper schooling on like how do you make an...
Right. The school of hard knocks really is how you learn video editing. Yeah. And there's no more helpful tool than just YouTube tutorials. Just keep watching them and then do them with the person, and you're going to figure out how to do a lot of stuff. I think there are some really like good animation classes if you're willing to shell out like $500 and take like a 3-week class and become pretty darn good. But that's for like After Effects animation to like, it's a little bit different when you're just learning how to keyframe things around. You can
and that can get you started.
Yeah, that will get you started for sure. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, who are some creators that either you follow in the video essay space that don't get attention, that you think are doing really good work, or who are some like guilty pleasures of YouTube that you're like, you can't stop watching? You could choose either one.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll answer both. So I think what's so great about that is a video essay channel. Her name is Grace. She is so good at editing, and she writes these beautiful pieces about all different kinds of things. But right. I noticed that one of her big focuses was on how space is used in film and things like that. And I think it's a really interesting angle, and she's great. So highly underrated. Check her out. Gosh, that's hard because there are so many great video essayists that like I feel like need attention. But Thomas Flight is great. Beyond the Frame, he actually works for like actual video essayist companies now and like doesn't make stuff for his channel anymore. Mm-hmm. But he's really great. And another sort of person who's right around our size is great. Is Entertain the Elk is great.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. So those are some of the video essayists I really like.
Let's get to the juicy stuff.
I wouldn't say that I consume video essays like a rabid YouTube consumer. In fact, I don't think I consume that much content as I used to.
Right.
But I would say my GC followings, okay, my friends and I, we all have, some of us have moved to different parts of the United States after graduating from college. And one of the things that we do now, one of the ways that we get to reconnect is we play video games together over the internet and we hang out and stuff.
Okay. What games?
So recently we've been playing the game everybody's been playing. Fortnite. We've been playing Fortnite together. And it's just so, like, you can say whatever you want about the game.
I've played Fortnite. It's great.
But, like, when you're with three of your friends, you know, running around and having a good time, it is one of the best ways for my friend in Chicago and my friend in Boston to come on a night where instead of like a Skype call, we can just all hang out,
right,
and do an activity together. And so, what has sort of expanded from that experience is like we also like to talk about the people who are really good. So we'll be like, oh, you know, this guy's really one of the guys we really like is a guy named Daquan. Okay. And he's just a really good player.
Yeah.
And he's really funny. And so we will like talk about him and other players who have YouTube channels.
Right.
And so it's a guilty pleasure because it's sort of like it's also become a way to bond with my friends about like something that we all do.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, funnily enough, I consume a good amount of Fortnite content because it's just something me and my friends do together.
I got in that, like, I probably played that game for like 4 weeks until I realized I have a really bad habit of, like, right after I came back from my honeymoon, I like was looking for a game and I got into, have you ever heard of Terraria?
No.
It's like, it's just a stupid game, but my personality is such that if it has any kind of like skill dimension or ladder dimension or like, you know, it's an RPG or anything like that, immediately that's all I want to do is like get better or level up or whatever it is. And so I probably spent the next 5 days, like, my wife would never see me. Like, I would be up all night till like basically 4 in the morning. The first time I played the game, I put in 9 hours straight on it.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, Fortnite. And Fortnite is like the hyper produced version of that. Like, I mean, it's even more fun. It's even more addicting.
It's incredibly addicting to the point where, like, I was just reading this thing about slot machines, how, like, slot machines are engineered to create near wins. And, like, that's the exact feeling you have playing that game, which is like, I feel like I almost won that one. And then you're like, I'm gonna ready up again.
Right. Yeah.
I'm gonna do this again.
Well, what I was shocked by is when you start, you actually don't feel that bad because even if you die like pretty quick, you're still gonna be like 50th. Or you're like, oh, I'm better than, you know, average or whatever.
Right. I think it's more fun to just play.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I don't really care about necessarily the place unless it's like close. I'm in the top, like, unless I'm close.
Yeah.
Like, if I get bottom whatever, I just want to get out and start playing again. Like, I don't feel bad about that.
Yeah.
But it started as something that I enjoyed playing on my own, and then it was clear that all my friends also were doing that.
Yeah.
And then now it's kind of been the reverse, is like I wouldn't play it unless all of us were playing it together and having a good time. I wouldn't turn it on unless we've all texted each other that we're going to play tonight.
Yeah, so one thing that I thought I didn't do for a while, and then I got like, this is really how I stopped playing video games, is I'll start watching content and I'll think, I'll never get to this level. So let me just enjoy. Yeah, let me just enjoy how good like Ninja is, and just enjoy like these insane no scopes. And this is just my way of vicariously like still kind of holding a connection to the game, but not feeling like I have to go, you know, play it myself and do it. But no, like actually visually, that's one of the most stunning games because the things you can do with like mats, all that kind of stuff is. Really?
Oh, the game itself is like, I don't know, they probably brought in someone who's like a social engineer who like knows like, all right, you need to put colors behind the guns because like the more colors in something makes it more addicting. You need to engineer the sound that, you know, every time you jump from the bus, that is like an addicting sound. Like they have it all perfected to the point where it's just like really addicting. And I understand why people like to watch it instead of watching a TV show. Like why people queue up to watch all those streamers because, you know, aside from the game's addictiveness, it's entertaining to watch.
Yep.
Like even a streamer who's completely silent and doesn't say a word, the gameplay is fascinating and interesting.
Yeah, I thought it is really interesting, and I think it's. Did you ever play like any of the MOBAs or anything like that?
No.
So that was the thing. Like this is Battle Royale. This is like the new thing that's huge. There's this thing before that were like called MOBAs, and I think the advantage of Battle Royales are that they're so much more accessible for laymen. Like with MOBAs, you had to know all this stuff about the characters, what the characters' moves did.
Is that like Dota and stuff?
That's Dota.
Okay.
LOL, you know, all that kind of stuff. But what's interesting is like Battle Royales are very easy to understand. I mean, as far as it's just a guy shooting another guy, whoever can shoot better wins, basically. There's strategy that goes deeper than that, but you can appreciate it on a surface level. Whereas if you watch a Dota game, unless you've played Dota before, you're completely lost.
As to what's happening. You know what's interesting about that, and this is somewhat of a stray thing, but a lot of my friends didn't appreciate soccer until they played FIFA. Because when you play FIFA, you start to realize, oh, this is why this formation does this. This is why you pass in this situation instead of taking the shot. And then because you know those ins and outs, the game, there's a whole new window into the game. And I think it's the same thing as like sometimes you just need to understand something until you can appreciate it. I guess that's a hilarious analogy for video essays too.
Yeah, you're right.
Can you appreciate a movie until you see like the director's crazy theme that they wanted to put in here? I don't know. Like, would you appreciate Citizen Kane more if someone explained all of Citizen Kane to you, or should you just appreciate it by watching Citizen Kane?
Yeah. So, philosophy seems like it's a through line through part of your work. Like bringing up philosophers you like here or there, or discussing the larger themes of works as being philosophically based. Who are your favorite philosophers? Do you have any that you really connect with? Exactly.
Yes. I think my favorite philosopher is David Hume, because he sort of parted with a lot of philosophers who were just like, we need to create super logical proofs and think about this only rationally. And Hume was like, no, I think everything's emotion based. And I agree with that. And a lot of like, I think Schopenhauer has a quote where he says, there's more to be learned in a page of Hume than most philosophical works of the last couple centuries.
Dang.
You know what? Actually, I kind of want to check that because I don't know if it's quite that hyperbolic.
Sure, check it.
It's like, I think he says like, it might not be like the past couple centuries, but like the great philosophical works or whatever.
Right.
And so I totally feel that. Like there were numerous times when I read an inquiry concerning the principles of morals where I was like, yes, like this is how I feel, you know? And so much of philosophy is breaking bounds, but also reinforcing belief. So like a lot of philosophy that you read will open your mind to huge new practical ideas. Other parts of it are important because it's like, yes, that so much reinforces how I feel.
Right.
Hume's the big one. Well, I should do this first. Schopenhauer on Hume. What did he say? You made a video about Schopenhauer.
Yeah, I did a video about his
about how to win an argument. Dirty tricks. Dirty tricks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And actually, that kind of goes along with your idea that Schopenhauer looked to Hume, who was kind of breaking from some of the traditions, because that book was very breaking against. Before that, philosophers had been very concerned with like how to make these perfectly logical arguments. And Schopenhauer comes along and says, well, the common man does not make perfectly logical arguments. They make arguments from, fallacious arguments all the time, to win. So he's like, well, let me try to codify, all these...
How they do it.
The common man, how they do it, exactly.
For sure. I'm totally going to get this. I just found it. There is more to be learnt from every page of David Hume than from the collected philosophical works of Hegel, Herbart, and Schleiermacher taken together. So I totally hyperbolized that, but... I think that's pretty, that's a firm statement to say, especially Hegel. Like, there's more to be learned from every page of Hume than the entire philosophical works of, some of, especially from Hegel. Although Hegel famously writes terribly. Yes, okay, back to favorite philosophers. Hume, number one, all time. And then after Hume, I'd say Seneca, Stoicism.
Yeah.
He was the best writer.
About it, yeah.
At least his letters tend to make me feel like I'm learning more about it than some of the other works. Like Epictetus is great because he's kind of funny. And I think humor is a great way to spice up teaching.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, also one of my favorite. I mean, it's on my desk every day. I love that book. So the Stoics in general, I guess, is an easier way to say it. I think the Stoics have the most practical philosophy that, someone in the modern world, if they need to follow something, because a lot of philosophy is highfalutin and it's like, does God exist type questions, that are fun to theorize about, but what philosophy can I go to feel practical, and that's a big divide, I think. Stoicism, I think, is incredibly practical, but besides that, I love John Stuart Mill because of his small little treatise on liberty. He's so right about so many things in that. And then I'd probably say Spinoza, just because his way of thinking about the world is just crazy and awesome. And his conception of God can really change the way how you see the entire world. Other than that, I love all different philosophers, but those are I guess the Mount Rushmore.
Right.
Group.
To change the game for you. Yeah.
Change the game. But yeah, if you haven't, read some Hume, read some Stoicism, and read Spinoza and read On Liberty. Those are my
tops.
My tops.
Nice. Cool.
Oh, and I'll push 2 books. Is it off?
Push it.
So there are 3 books.
See, he really is here.
This is actually my bookshelf. Wait, where's the...
I've been passing it for mine this entire time.
I don't know where it is. Okay, so I don't know where it is. But there's one book written by... And this is outside of individual works. So there's one book written by the famous Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. It is by far the best history and summary of philosophy up to, I don't know the date, but before Wittgenstein, I think. But these are just as good, if not better. The Dream of Reason starts with the Greeks, and then the Dream of Enlightenment continues after that with the Enlightenment philosophers. And they're written by the same person, right? Same dude, journalist for the Wall Street Journal, I think. But these are so, I haven't found any books besides Bertrand Russell's history of Western philosophy that are as good as these two. I think what scares so many people away from philosophy is that, like, it's, when you read certain books, you're like, I can't follow this at all. You know?
A lot of times, too, they're indirect response to an
philosophy.
age of thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you have to start tracing back, and yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah, those are great. Those are great. I highly recommend, if you don't read philosophy, to at least give it a try, because you never know. It could change your opinion on how to live your life. Yeah.
Life well lived.
A life well lived. Who knows what that truly means?
So we live in a more connected age than ever, but also a more distracting age than ever. Mm-hmm. And you address this idea in the attention economy, where you argue that it's not an information age, actually the real currency is attention. I think for someone like me who wants to be highly productive, I think for a lot of people, the question is, how do you harness technology without suffering the drawbacks of so many media sites being so good at
drawing you in?
Fortnite.
Sure.
Anything.
Do you
have any tools?
Solutions are not all that clear. I think they depend on from person to person, because so much of it is habitual. Like, I don't use Facebook anymore, but without a doubt, every couple days I'll type FA into my search bar and it will autofill Facebook, and I'll hit enter. I didn't choose to do that. My habitual brain, FA, Facebook. How do we get out of those habits is the harder question.
Correct.
I think it's really a balance. Like, can a service that requires your attention to survive also be beneficial to you and do things that don't grab your attention? So, like, can Snapchat make the decision to kill streaks because they ruin teenagers' lives? You know what I mean?
Right. Like, streaks is made to grab
them on,
continual attention, right?
And have them keep sending things to their friends.
Yes.
What a disaster in terms of, having a kid put their phone down.
Right.
So it's really up to the services. It's not that up to you. I believe that very firmly. I think they have grasped how easy it is to exploit human psychology now, that you aren't really in control. The only things that you can really... No, I'm dead serious. The only things that you can really do are to turn it off. Yeah. That's what I've done, is turn things off. Right. So, for example, I don't have browser on my phone anymore, so that I can't search anything, and it's restricted.
You can delete your browser?
You can restrict it.
Got it.
And you can always enter the passcode to unrestrict it.
Sure.
But I think by deleting the habitual swipe press, and when you swipe and it's not there, your brain's like, oh, I won't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Same thing goes for...
Or you're interrupting
the pattern.
In the power of habit.
You're interrupting the routine.
Yeah, there's the... actually, you're interrupting...
the cue.
Yeah, the trigger.
You're interrupting the cue.
So, yeah, in The Power of Habit, which is a great book.
Yeah.
What's his...
Charles Duhigg.
Charles Duhigg. Yeah. He talks about there's the trigger, the routine, and then the reward. And you basically have to cut off, I believe...
You have to change the routine.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but before you can change the routine, you have to figure out what the cue and the reward are.
Yeah.
Because I think the example he uses from himself is at work, every day I would get up and go get a cookie, and then when I got up, I got to socialize with my coworkers, and then I got to sit down. He wanted to get rid of getting the cookie part, he realized that the only reason he actually got up was because he wanted to talk to his coworkers and take a social break. So instead, he replaced the routine with, I just got triggered to go get a cookie. Instead of getting that cookie, I'm going to go socialize with my coworkers, someone who's free, whatever.
Yep.
And then I get the same reward. So I guess his idea of changing a habit is keep the cue and the reward the same, but consciously change the routine.
Yeah. I've done something like that with soda. It's like cut it into club soda.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like you still get that the fizziness, you get all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And people look at it like, that's not that good. And compared to water, that's true. But as a replacement compared to soda, that's true. But as like a replacement for it, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Seltzer.
no. Yeah.
Seltzer's a great replacement for soda.
Not club
It's an
soda.
expensive
Seltzer.
habit, though. What?
Seltzer is very different from club soda, and Schoder wants you to know that.
Yeah. Seltzer's way better than club soda. I don't know what this guy's talking about. But the original question was like, how does someone
Change the habit.
how does someone who wants to work not get distracted?
Yeah, totally.
I think a big thing is you need to change your environment. So I think a lot of people see it as a willpower thing, which is the wrong way to frame it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of gurus will say like, you just need the willpower to change your thing, which is like, I guess there's some willpower to stuff. I get it, but I think there's nothing more powerful than your environment. So if you can change an aspect of your environment, like let's say I notice when I'm writing a script that, every time I take a break, I go down a hole of Twitter and then all of a sudden I'm out of it 45 minutes later. Then maybe instead I should go write in a coffee shop and see if the environment helps at all.
Right.
I think environmental triggers are huge because when you change the environment, you change the cue. Like the cue isn't the same if you're in a different environment.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a big thing.
Well, that's the answers that I wanted to get at, because putting it all on the app or the service is, you're probably right that as far as like for most people, nothing's going to change until the app changes. I agree with that. However, that leaves like me or somebody at home who's like really desperate to like, oh, I need to focus more, or whatever. Just kind of like
the
throwing up their
self-employed
hands.
are really trapped.
Yeah.
Because
But you can make meaningful change by yourself, but you won't have like a complete, unless you're going to become like a Luddite and have a phone and like.
Right. Well, so this isn't my idea, but there's the idea of batching, but you have to get in the habit of batching, which is to say like in the morning, after you complete your routine or whatever, you batch your emails. Then that's the only time you get to check your email. Or you could do it twice a day.
Sure.
A lot of the problems people have is like the consistent, every time I get a text, I get to see what it is. Or every time I get an email, I got to make sure I see what it is. Instead, what you should do is split it into 2 times per day where you're like, this is the only time I'm allowed to do it. All the other times I'm not allowed to do this. And that is a huge help because most emails and most texts do not need to be answered right away.
Right.
Like, if what you can tell your family is like, the only way I'm going to pick up, you need to call me if there's like an emergency. Because I feel like a lot of people are worried that if I keep it over there for 8 hours while I do work, I could miss out on like something really bad.
Right.
Just make sure that the people who regularly contact you know that you are from whatever, 10 to 5 p.m. or doing intense work, and sorry, your phone's going to be off or your phone's not going to be close to you. There's no problem with saying that, There's no problem with doing that. And then again with the emails, like do it at 10, do it at 6. That's it. Like, there's no reason why an email between 6 and 10 the next day needs to be answered, unless like you're running a company.
And I think a lot of people too, they have like habits of like checking Twitter all the time or checking to see if they got
That's
a
my big
notification.
problem with Twitter.
I'm bad about Twitter. I'm also bad about YouTube because
You're on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube. So
I don't have as big of a YouTube problem. Twitter is a big problem. Novelty. New ideas always.
Yeah.
I guess I could explain what I do. I don't know if it would be helpful for people.
Sure. No, come on, give us what you do.
Like, well, okay. If you're a computer guy or girl, got to get rid of that habit.
If you're a computer person?
If you're a computer person, you want to use rescue time. I can't remember how much it costs. You're going to have to spend money on it, but it keeps track of all your usage.
Is it an app? Is it a software?
It's software.
On your computer?
It's on your computer,
okay.
And it keeps track of everything. Keeps track of your use of video games, your use of Adobe programs, your use of the internet, and what sites you go to. And then it has a AI, or maybe it's just, chosen by humans, and you can edit this too, it has a productive scale from -2 to 2, 2 being very productive, -2 being very distracting.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything more effective than at the end of the week getting an email from Rescue Time saying, you spent 21 hours on entertainment this week, and you spent 30 hours on
work,
on design and composition or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're at the end of the week, you say, oh my gosh, like I didn't, without knowing it, I played video games, went on Twitter, and watched a movie enough time to be just short of how much I worked. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, that's huge.
And when you see that in front of you, I think that's a great way to just be like, okay.
Yeah, because for a lot of people, it's like...
They don't know that they're doing it.
Well, you're bleeding
hours.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a thing for a while. It became like... It was a lot of upkeep, but I had this like really rigorous time management system where like I tracked every...
Didn't last?
It lasted for like several months.
Oh, that's good.
Actually lasted a while. Because especially when I first started like doing YouTube, I was determined not to get sidetracked. So I would track
right.
until I basically, from the time I woke up to the time that I went to bed, and I had all these like buckets for like what classified as work, what classified as whatever, and that was totally eye-opening to the same thing. And I would have like weekly progress reports and like but it became too complicated. So I like a software that
does it for you.
Does it for you, exactly.
Yeah.
The one thing is how does it know if, like, let's say I have Adobe open, but I'm not using it?
It's only use
active
hours.
Windows.
It's only active. It knows. It knows that you're being active.
I want it. Yeah, great.
So like you could have Spotify open and Adobe open, but it's only going to keep track of Adobe if Spotify's playing in the background.
Right, and if I go and I click on like, I'm going to go check Twitter or whatever, and I still have Adobe on the other screen, it's going to count.
Yeah, so what it does in that regard is like it will measure out the productive versus distracting. So it could register like a neutral half hour where like you were doing Adobe, but you were also going on Twitter and you were also changing your Spotify songs. It would determine based on, I don't know, complicated stuff that for this half hour you actually weren't being that productive. It does like keep track of like this half hour you were only using Adobe.
Now, do they have that for the phone?
I don't know. I haven't used it for the phone. Because my problem isn't the phone. My problem is the workspace.
Right.
I'm sure other people have bigger problems with the phone.
No, I have a bigger problem with the workspace personally.
Yeah,
but I know
it depends on the person. Like I know other people who have much bigger problems with phone than their computer. My problem is the computer.
If anybody has a problem with the phone, there's a great app called Freedom, which is like it's just an internet blocker. So you can go like, I want to be blocked for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. Yeah. It'll sync up to your computer too, and you can do like all sorts of like social block sites. But I like this Rescue Time. I haven't heard of it before.
Rescue Time's great, and they have great support. Like,
because there's an element of reflection involved, which I really like.
right? Yeah,
it's passive, and you don't need to be like, even if you know you're getting distracted, like you're not, because like for example, let's say you run Freedom, and you just want to be distracted that week. Well, you're just not going to run Freedom that week.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas Rescue Time, it's like just passive. So it'll report on your bad behavior as well.
Right.
And just be like, okay, you probably should get it together as far as like.
Right. You need to assess yourself and make a change. But like, it is eye-opening to be like, oh, I didn't realize I spent 50 hours playing Fortnite this week.
Do you think that helped you? Do you think it helped?
Oh, big time.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
So that's like a big thing for you.
Yeah. Rescue Time's huge. And then there's another one, which I bet is not for everybody, but it's called BeMinder, which is it just is loss aversion psychology. So it's like if you don't hit a certain goal, BeMinder charges you. So it's money loss aversion. I mean, I think for the most part, in terms of getting goals completed, the two biggest things that psychologists say are social pressure and loss of like money, like losing money. The idea of like having to pay BeMinder $5,000 if you don't complete your novel in 2 years gets people to write their novels. You know what I mean? Like, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So
how do they know? So give us a goal you set.
You could set something as simple as, I want BeMinder to link up with my to-do list, and you can set novel due December 21st. And then you can email BeMinder and be like, this is the hard date. I am not allowed to check this box on my to-do list app until that date. Like, you need to prove, like, BeMinder's that good. Like, their support will be like, no, you're a little weasel, and you're just going to hit the box.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering.
And complete it. And so our system's going to update.
Right.
But you can also tell them, I'm not allowed to do that. And they will make sure that you stay true
That's
to
almost
it.
like a notary or something like that.
Well, it's pressure. It's actual pressure.
I like
that's one of the things that people have such trouble with is like they try all these different things and then they are not culpable. Is that the right word?
Yeah, responsible.
They're not responsible, and then they just
if it all goes
they
to
waive
hell,
responsibility
yeah.
if it doesn't go well. And so is like in terms of getting stuff done, if you're self-employed, that's a big one. So BeMinder's great. Like I think loss aversion is a huge way to get stuff done. And that's a good program to use it. And it links up with all different stuff like to-do lists. If you can link it with Runkeeper. So like if you want to run
how many miles?
If you want to run 10 miles a week.
Yeah.
Then you can connect it with BeMinder and said, if I don't run 10 miles this week, BeMinder's going to charge me whatever you're not willing to lose.
So that's a good app, like in conjunction with other
paying attention apps.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really sad that we have to do this. Like, don't you think that we have to like have additional apps to help us do these things?
No, in some ways I think that's super important that those apps get developed because
it's important that they exist. What I'm saying is like it sucks that we have to use them, like, because otherwise we'd like just sit here and not do the things. Like even if you really wanted to do something, like write a movie script.
Right. There's a good chance you're not going to do it.
There's still a good chance, even though you're passionate about that you're not going to do it.
Right. Well, we're just unable to think about long-term goals all the time and keep their weight in mind.
Right.
And so it's like, I think you may have mentioned this earlier about we have hardware that doesn't fit what we're using, the tools that we're using. And it's like the tools that we're using are so distracting and so good at always having something novel, like kind of maybe more interesting than writing your screenplay or, all these things. And so it's like, you need software that's on your side as well, like on your long-term goal side.
Right. Yeah, again, it's the ancient interface with brand new thing that takes advantage of
Right.
ancient interface.
Well, yeah, I'm really looking forward to like. I feel like the internet is basically like a fire hose, a fire hydrant of information. Basically,
For sure.
you're not going to retain it all, and you have the input of maybe just like a normal drink of water. And so part of that is like, let's lower the output, and I need software to do that for me. I want software to filter out.
That's why video essays are
amount of-
popular.
Yeah. Filter out all the noise to get to a nice little nectar of what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also why it's important to just turn it off and read a book as well. But I totally agree with that analogy. It's like you can only drink so much water coming from a fire.
Well, yeah, I've actually got a better one because I realized you need a good example for resistors. Like with electricity, something is only useful if you can get it to the voltage that your thing needs. Like most don't need 120 volts. So a big part of all boards are resistors to like step it down to whatever exactly how much you need. Yeah. And so it's the resistors part that.
Yeah, the resistor. Well, I think that's an important point because so many people don't spend the time to create that infrastructure in order to create those points of resistance, and so they just keep doing the same thing. And it's worth spending a week, a month, closing the gap until you're at that point, at which point you can more or less take your hands off of it and accept what you've got.
Right.
But if you never create that infrastructure, you're going to continue to just be bombarded with infinite information and probably retain none of it. Yeah.
So one question I've wanted to ask is, what inspired you to get into video essays? Like, what was the turning point? Was it a person? Was it a video?
It was the Nerd Writer. I was, God, it was a long time ago. Like, I hate to be one of those people who was like, I was one of the first, subscribers of that guy. But
first 70,000.
Yeah, right. I was one of the first 70,000. So like,
very impressive.
Very new. There, you could fit his fan base in 2 football stadiums at that point. But like, I watched a video of his. I can't remember what video it was. I guess it was more of like a conglomeration of watching a bunch at once, probably. But I knew it was his channel. And I had done some soul searching. This is sort of passing a bunch of stuff, but at the time I was doing comedy. I wasn't enjoying it. I have a really good group of friends. And working like the day job into comedy at night was like, I wasn't willing to endure the long path to comedic success to drop
that it takes
to drop like my health, my family, my friends, all those things that most people tend to have to drop in order to spend the time to master something. I knew that I was not a prodigy. It was going to take me probably a decade or more, and I just wasn't willing to do that. And so I did some soul searching about comedy, like why was I even doing it? And I think one of the things that why I fell in love with comedy in the first place is because it's like a place of ideas and teaching. And in that respect, it's not that different from writing an educational piece, because my introduction to comedy was like the Hicks, the Carlins, the guys who were like,
they're making a point underneath the comedy.
The ironic like mode of like teaching through deconstructing something was really fascinating to me. But interestingly enough, and that's the thing, is I was more interested in that aspect of it than getting the laughs. And so like, I know for a fact I was also interested in getting the laughs, but it wasn't like such a disease that I had that like, if I couldn't get laughs anymore, I couldn't live anymore. It was more like, I'm willing to give up not doing that to do something that I know that I'm going to like. And we talked about this yesterday, I think, which is if you combine two skills and make them into one thing.
This is Scott Adams' quote.
Yeah, that if you take two things that you think you're good at and you combine them, that immediately puts you way ahead of a lot of other people
who just have one skill.
Exactly. And so like in my mind I was like, okay, I'm not that bad at video editing because I've cut some films and I bet I could teach myself really quickly. And I know that I've been taught by some really good teachers to become a good writer over a long period of time. I have those two skills. Why don't I, throw an axe at the dartboard and see if it sticks? And that's exactly what I do. I took out like my first essay and I was just like, I'm going to throw it into the void. And it got caught by a bunch of people.
Yeah, your first essay did really well. Like I was looking back at it, I think it's almost at 1 million, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's probably, I think, a long time.
But it got caught immediately.
It got caught immediately. Like it got caught on Reddit was where it skyrocketed. So, I was talking to the Wisecrack guys. This was a long time ago.
Yeah. Like
probably at this point 2 years ago, but we were talking about like how Wisecrack got started, and they said the same thing. They're like Reddit, one of our videos caught fire on Reddit. And I think it's amazing what Reddit does for creators. And at the same time, you can post something to Reddit and it's totally a dud.
So what's really interesting that I find really cool about Reddit is, unlike YouTube where it's like, it really matters if you have this gigantic following, on Reddit, it's like you're almost egoless.
It's a
like
huge democracy.
Your last piece of content could have had, it could have went to RL, been the biggest post of all time. Your next post will be judged just like everybody else's.
Yeah.
It's like has to be good on its own merit.
Right.
And that's a reason that new creators, it's such a good place.
It's a great place for new creators. That said, there are rabid fan bases who do get creators' videos to the top, pretty regularly. So, I think I've noticed, at least, that H3H3, anytime they post something, their fans they have a very loyal fan base, will get them within the first 10 videos on Reddit, which is great. It's great to have a fan base like that. But in terms of, as you were saying, Reddit's way more of a democracy.
That was my point. It's on YouTube, it's so tough.
Yeah, for sure. At YouTube, I think you're much more at the chokehold of the algorithm. Like if it puts you in suggested videos, if it shows you to X amount of people. Right. Whereas Reddit's it's going to show it, and you're more likely to get random traction from 15 people who happen to be looking at new videos and upvoted you. Exactly. So yeah, Reddit was where the first video essay stuck and took off, and then I was like, okay, now I have to make the next one. But that's the answer though, is this is a type of video I've never seen before.
Right.
I would love to do this.
So I think I actually have one of the few versions of this that do not come from Nerdwriter, because I think a lot of essayists are inspired. I liked him, but I started because I was really inspired by a combination of Zay Frank, if you know who that is. Uh-huh. He's now the president of BuzzFeed, which is really interesting because he was valued for really introspective content, and then now he's the president of the biggest mass, whatever content in the world.
Yeah.
Clickbait. But I was inspired by him, and then I was inspired by The Daily Show, these really engaging. So I started, and it's unlisted now, but I had these camera videos where I turn on the camera and talk.
Talk show.
Yeah, and then I was really interested in the ability to use images over here, because I noticed news anchors don't do that. I was oh, this is an evolution. So then I started to do that in my videos, and I started to do more of them and more of them. And then all of a sudden I was like, why am I here at all? Like, what's the purpose of me being in frame? What's actually kind of taking this communication to the next level is the images. So I was like, let me just go all image.
Yeah. Well, I think that's
then I discovered the genre, and then I was like, oh, this totally makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to go about it. The decision that I think YouTubers have to make in the genre is, am I going to combine education with my personality, or am I going to be mostly education? So, like, in a nutshell, nobody knows
it's education.
Any of them are.
Right.
Like, but John Green is a combination.
He's a personality.
He's a personality, but he's an educational personality.
Yep.
So you have to make the choice of what you're going to do.
What's your choice?
I don't think I've made it yet. I think for now it's just me narrating, but
I used to not
I'm trying, necessarily.
I don't know. I've been flipping on that. But that is definitely a choice I have to make.
Everybody's got to make it because YouTube is inherently a personality-based platform.
Yep.
So you have to decide if you're going to use that or not.
Right.
Like, if you tried to make an original show, it suddenly flips this. We talked about this earlier. It suddenly makes it not seem like YouTube.
Yeah. All right, I want to talk about irony.
Okay.
And because a lot of your videos deal with, your first video is about David Foster Wallace, the problem with irony. Mm-hmm. But then a lot of your videos are also about like Rick and Morty, Simpsons, South Park, all these shows, BoJack Horseman, that are largely...
They capitalize on irony.
They come from cynicism, irony, all that stuff. How do you think about that? And do you think that there's any scaffold of meaning that they're missing? Or do you think that... What do you think about these shows?
It's a really, really hard question, because even once you're teaching from that mode of discourse, like once you're teaching from irony and you are using it to pull back the veil on things and say, this is not how it seems, kind of, right? It's hard to escape that. It's hard to go back and say, now I'm only going to talk about this from this one level and be confident and sincere about that. And I'm not going to talk about the potential underlayer that subverts that.
Yeah, right. It's a sword that cuts both ways.
It cuts both ways. I mean, I can't make the point any better than Wallace did however many years ago, which was just like, once everything is saturated with that, where do you go from there? Like, once you've ironically deconstructed everything, then what? Like, what do you do next?
Yeah.
Like, and we talked about this just at lunch, which was that, like, you can see these hyper sincere figures coming into the mainstream because there are a lot of people who are lost because everything in their generation has just been so taken apart to the point where they're like, what should I believe?
Yeah.
And then someone comes along and says, here, I have one set of beliefs for you. And I'm going to speak charismatically, and I have these ideas that are appealing, and here's your framework. And then you see those people just flying up. And one of the big problems with irony is it's a great way to, show things for what they are in some respects. But again, it doesn't lead you necessarily to an answer, which is a big problem with irony.
Yeah.
In terms of the shows that you mentioned, though, one of the things about them is I think they know that. Like, these writers know about this problem. And so a lot of them have tried to add in elements of the opposite of like, how do we...
Sincerity at the end of the irony.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, exactly, which has been called a lot of things.
Yeah.
I guess most popularly it's been called metamodernism.
Yeah, right.
It's very hard to define easily, but essentially, like, for example, BoJack Horseman, like, he's so well trained in the cynicism of the like, just like the audience. And the way to pass through that is essentially to have him say something ironic or cynical, and then have the opposite be true in the narrative. And I think Raphael Bob Waxberg is a genius when it comes to this, which is sort of like, I'm going to take something that everybody is so ironic and cynical about, and then show that it's not necessarily the be-all, end-all truth about the matter, and that it can also go the other direction a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of writers know this problem. They've been working on it. I think one of the big problems remains is that irony makes the viewer feel smarter than they are. It's true.
That's so true.
It's just a fact. It's like, ha ha ha, I'm in on the joke. So, and that keeps someone attached to it.
Right.
And so when someone watches Jon Stewart and he makes an ironic comment, oh, this is old now, he's not on TV, but like when they feel like they're in on the joke, boom, you activated the tribal senses. That person is ready to keep listening to them being holier than thou, ironic above the other person. It remains a problem in culture. I don't think it's as bad as it was when Wallace was talking about it. At least I don't think so. Like, I think there's so many other outlets now with the internet that you don't have to be stuck there.
Sure.
I was definitely stuck there, which is why he's so influential on me. Is like, I thought it was the be-all, end-all. I was raised on Jon Stewart. I was raised on simply treating things as ironic constantly. And then all of a sudden, reading Wallace was like, it was almost like a flip switched in my brain. A switch flipped.
You flipped the words.
Yeah. A switch flipped in my brain. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's amazing that a writer can do that for you, but they can.
I think most people on YouTube want to encourage more creative content, more, less Logan Pauls. I don't speak for everybody, obviously.
Sure.
And more Will Scoders.
Oh, that's
how do we make that happen?
Far too complimentary. I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest.
Because there's only one Will Schoder.
Yeah. Well, but there's so many other creative people that
how do we encourage quality content?
It's the medium is in charge. There is no thing that individuals outside of being a creator and hoping that you catch fire.
Right.
There's no other enforcement system. Mm-hmm. So until there's a system in place where people are rewarded for high quality creative things, they're not going to exist. Like, yes, there are people who operate outside of the economy and they become really creative and they struggle and they make cool things.
Right.
But if you want it to be widespread, it has to be a part of the economy. So Patreon's getting there. A simple thought experiment for viewers would be, think about how often you buy a coffee, right? Let's say your coffee is anywhere from $1.50 to $4.
Right.
Depending on where you get it from.
Starbucks or home brew.
Or your bodega down the corner.
Yeah.
So if you put that same amount of money, $1, toward all the people you subscribe to, that might be way too many. That might be $200. But let's say there's 2 or 3 that you love. the only way you can change the economy in terms of like without having YouTube change the way ads work is to do it yourself as an audience member and say, here, instead of buying a coffee every day that comes out to like, I don't know, anywhere from $30 to $150 a month, if you really drink a lot of coffee, what if I just sequestered like $5 for a person? For some people, you can't do that. Some people don't. As an audience member, you don't have that money.
But most people buy coffee, Will.
A lot of people make purchases unknowingly, and they just kind of throw the money everywhere. And I can tell you, as someone who has a Patreon, that like mentally and financially, every dollar makes the ability to be creative and higher quality possible, like without question. I think it was Your Movie Sucks who said that if 1% of my 300,000, this was a long time ago, I think he's way bigger now, but if it was like 1% of my 300,000 subscribers gave me $1 a month,
that would change everything.
It'd be a full-time job.
Yeah, it'd change everything.
And those people throwing that dollar out probably would have no idea that they were, like missing that in their finances in a bad way. I guess that's not a good way to put it. $1 is not that big of a change in your daily financial activity, and it is collectively a huge deal for a small creator.
It won't, for most people, it won't change their standard of living for them, but given enough of them that do it, it will change the standard of living for the creator and give them more freedom to do it. I think that's interesting, and I think people are coming around to the fact that the new, like, Patreon isn't going away, and the need for creators to make money isn't going away. And with everything becoming free, you don't really have to have cable anymore. You can like have Netflix, which is pretty cheap. You can have all these things which are pretty cheap. So you're freed up in the side of information and like entertainment have become way cheaper. But you also, it's gotten harder because of that for creators to make money. There's less money for that. So a lot of time, I don't know, because it's hard to make a call to action and say like, oh, you should give money or whatever, but it really does make a difference for the individual creator. And you can really foster some change, whereas before you were maybe supporting 1,000 channels that, maybe you only cared about like 5 of the 1,000 package. Now you can directly support with the money that you save from like, you're not paying for TV anymore, you can directly create more of the content you want to see, and you can see more of that in the world.
Yes, I mean, it's not a position that I can argue very comfortably, but like I do think that you need to pay for content that comes out. Like creators need to get paid somehow. And at the same time, the culture of like free remix everything is also good. So it's really hard to like find a sweet spot where you're like, content creators need to get paid, but also like we should keep things free and open so that more people can remix and learn.
Definitely.
So I don't think we culturally have hit a sweet spot yet in terms of that. I do think more people are coming around to the idea of I want to go out of my way to support content.
Yeah.
And so back to the original premise of the question, which is how do we add more high quality creative people to make YouTube videos? I don't know.
High quality Will Schoders.
Cut me off the platform. I'm trash. No.
You heard it here first, YouTube?
Yeah.
Susan, I don't know how to say the last name.
It's one of the two. So it's either as an individual, you go directly to creator through Patreon or something similar.
Yeah.
Or the system in place changes the way it treats creators. But yeah, thank you. That's very complimentary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do appreciate that. Like,
but that's really how I feel about your content.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
There are very few creators, with you included, but every now and then, like, someone will release a video and it's like, just, I'll stop whatever I'm doing. And I like have to go watch it. So.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
like,
But it's like
I see that comment a lot actually from people. There's like, coffee break uploads, no problem.
Nobody
I drop
says
what
that.
I'm
Nobody
doing,
says that.
and I watch that video. Yeah, that's. I love those.
Never
comments.
seen that, but it's nice. But anyways, yeah, to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on the show. This is the first iteration of the Coffee With podcast / video. So
Yeah.
forgive my editing mistakes, or they're all mine.
Yeah. 3,000 ceramic pots, man. You'll get there.
Yeah. Eventually.
No, this is great. Thank you for starting this. I think it's a really good idea. And I hope that you continue to do this with a lot of other interesting people, because there are an infinity of interesting people making content out there. So I think you have a great group of people to draw from, and I think this is a great idea.
Thanks.
Yeah, man.
We'll see. Thanks for being the first one. Yeah, I'll maybe bring you on again when we get this thing figured out, and we'll have like a reshoot of that.
Yeah, well, we could, episode.
Will Schoder when it hits 2 million subs.
Yeah. Oh, one day. One day. One day. I'll get there.
That's what you're going to be saying on like your 25th video.
I know. My 25th video when I'm 89. Thank you, everybody.
Slowly longer in scope. The last one's like, they think you've retired, and like 25 years later, you're like 80, you release your final.
Yeah, it took me 10 years to make this last video. It takes me increasingly longer to make videos, which is the opposite direction of everybody else. That would be very interesting.
That's great. All right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how to end this. Great. Let's just wrap it up.
Yeah, man. Cut it off.
Got it. All right. Cool.
We should read a quote from The World According to Mr. Rogers. In times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers.